Good morning, everyone. I'm James Smith from Brigham Young University private school in Utah in the United States. And just real quickly, he's not here, but I want to thank the organizing committee for giving me a chance to give my first ever presentation in shorts and tennis shoes. And it is awesome. And for future conferences, I'm a big proponent of this. So yeah, I had a graduate student. This is actually from a previous position that I held at Clemson University. I had a graduate student named Coy Mule, who's from the Philippines. He's actually the one who did this work. So I'm just presenting it on his behalf. But he worked in the finishing industry prior to coming back to getting his master's degree. And that was why he was interested in this particular aspect, although he did not work in the States. That was the data that we had, basically, that we were able to collect. And so we limited our scope to finishing contractors within the United States. Now, the project itself is very straightforward. Basically, it's moving on here. Sorry, I messed it up. So what he did, because he wanted to focus on finishing, and I said, well, you're going to have to check and see what other research there is, of course, related to lean in finishing contractors. So he went and did it, looked through a bunch of areas, and found that for most areas there was some research done about implementation of lean, and so luckily for him, when he got to finishing, he couldn't find anything about finishing. And so he was able to take that on as a project. That was the gap that he identified. And his project was basically to answer the question, is lean being implemented in finishing, amongst finishing contractors? And if not, why not? If so, how's it going? Basically, that kind of basic question. And a few areas fall into the building finishing, which is defined by the NICS. Drywall installation, painting, flooring, and finished carpentry all fall into this. We'll talk about why this is a little problematic here in a minute, but the finishing portion of a job is a substantial portion, particularly so in residential, less so in commercial, but still, 12% of the average total cost. So we're talking about relatively substantial numbers where there would be room for improvement or potential room for improvement. So basically, we took an organization that's in the United States, that's the Finishing Contractors Association, and randomly selected from their publicly available membership people to respond to this survey. And in honesty, not a great response rate. You can see up there 24 out of 300 sent out. So it's really quite weak as far as response rate goes, but I believe it is still an indication of the status of implementation within finishing contractors. What we ended up with was basically two groups, and we designed the survey to handle both groups. One is a group that's self-proclaimed as being lean practitioners, and the other group are those who self-proclaimed as being non-practitioners. Right, so the questions were piped so that each group got a little bit different set of questions. You can see those here. Lean practitioners were asked about their background, so a little bit of demographic, and then into what practices they implemented, drivers, challenges, and differences experienced on a lean project versus a traditional project. And then the non-practitioners were asked about the same demographics questions, and then what the barriers were that they were experiencing. And that's basically the nuts and bolts of this presentation, this project. So that's the data that I'll share with you here. As I mentioned, definitely limited as a research project as far as rigor goes, limited by the low response rate and total number of respondents. And also, as with many online surveys, there are some issues that you deal with, but that's okay. You can still kind of, with awareness, work around them a little bit. But it is a self-report mechanism, so people may define lean differently, right? Or they may define lean certain practices that we'll talk about here. They may view those differently when they read them, and so there's a little room for error there. The only thing that I'll mention here from the demographics is that the majority of non-practitioners had an annual volume that was less than 10 million, while the majority, the strong majority of practitioners had an annual volume over 50 million. So one of the interesting things that really is not surprising, but is confirmed in this data, is that companies that are doing more volume are able to recognize the benefits of lean more actively and more predominantly than those that are doing smaller levels of work, right? It's like you probably heard building a doghouse versus building a hospital, how much benefit you get out of lean on a doghouse, right, versus how much benefit you might get out of lean on a hospital. I believe there's benefit to both, but the level or the magnitude of benefit is different. So here's from the lean practitioners themselves. This figure just highlights practices that they again self-proclaimed as being implementing right now for those who said that they were doing lean. At the top two there, I've highlighted last planner system and huddle meetings. Not too surprising there either, probably in line with what you might expect. Going down to some that are down towards zero, you can see those. But last planner system, I think, is an easy, I should say easy, is a immediately applicable way to break people into lean, and so you may see that. It's not surprising that it shows up here. Drivers, what they believe were drivers, mostly improving profitability, cutting costs, and then decreasing project schedule. Challenges that they faced, the biggest one, and this shows up again later, but the lack of knowledge, which of course is a challenge for all of us, but lack of knowledge being one of the big ones. I think we often talk about lack of support from a project team, or people claim that they don't have that upper support, but you see here that it's been less about that, at least in the finishing contractor world. It's not so much that people aren't there to support it, it's just they don't know. They don't have the information. Lean implementation benefits, for those that were practicing, the top two benefits were planning and coordination and client job satisfaction, which I think are both powerful things. Particularly, I think the fact that they really felt like clients were happier with those jobs, I think is a great outcome that they noticed. Non-practitioners, on the other hand, only a couple of slides here, but the non-practitioners, their biggest claim, again, similar to the challenge slide for the practitioners, their biggest claim for why they can't do it is just a lack of knowledge. So once again, you see, where is it? Lack of support from a project team down below the 10% range there. So it wasn't so much that people weren't there to support them or they didn't feel that way. More so just that they just don't know. They don't know what it is. So a few conclusions from this. Consistent with the other literature, I feel like the data that was collected, although there were a few low response rate and not many respondents, it is consistent with what we've seen previously in similar types of studies. One big one that I referenced earlier is the McGraw-Hill study. Similar results to that, so I feel like it supports that same thing. The lean practices generally are not common among finishing contractors, especially smaller companies. And I think that's where we've had a few presentations here so far that have talked about SMEs. And I think it's a fascinating opportunity maybe going forward to find, and if anybody was here from the industry day, we actually had a presentation about case studies on SMEs and their implementation of lean. But how it happens on a small project, I think, is still an area, in a small company, even still an area that could use a lot more attention. Yeah, I mentioned that already. But, in closing, I guess I think my graduate student did a good job. I think it leaves a lot open for discussion, but I think the finishing world is ripe for more lean knowledge, and would be interested in finding it. And that's everything I have to say. Questions?